I will declare open this hearing of the Joint Select Committee on Social Media and Australian Society. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, where I am, that's the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on all the lands that other committee members are joining us from today, and any First Nations people present with us today. My name's Sharon Clayton. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by other members of the committee who are participating by video conference and teleconference, so taking use of all platforms here. These are public proceedings being audio and video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and Hansard transcript is being taken. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to the committee, and such action may be treated by the Parliament as contempt. It is also contempt to give false or misleading evidence, and witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard for the grounds on which it is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. And I ask everyone to ensure that you've, just because we've got a lot of my colleagues joining online, just to switch off, and those present in the audience, switch off your mobile phones if you've got them on, or pop them onto silent. And for those joining us by video conference and teleconference, I just ask that you mute your connection while you are not speaking. I remind all committee members that as we continue our work implementing the Set the Standard report, as chair, I ensure that proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous manner. I now welcome representatives from Meta. Sorry, just before I do, just because there is some media interest in this, I just want to make sure that that you are fully knowing that there is media in the room, and they've requested permission to film and take photographs of the committee's proceedings, and the committee has agreed to this. And I remind the media that this permission can be revoked at any time if and that the media must follow the direction of the Secretariat staff. If any witnesses object to being filmed or photographed, the committee will consider that request. So I might just ask you up front if you have any objections. No? Okay, thank you. I believe that, do I need to make this formal, this little bit here for media? I'm sure that media understand all of these rules, but there's no media activity that occurs during, if there are suspensions or adjournments of proceedings. Thank you, colleagues. With the formal introductions done, I do want to hand across now to welcome representatives from Meta. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate and, in this case, joint committees has been provided to you. So I just want to check that's the case. Yes? Thank you. And for the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? We'll start with that and then I'll invite you on your opening statement. So if I could perhaps cross to you, Ms Davis, first.
Of course. My name is Antigone Davis and I'm here as the Global Head of Safety at Meta.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Mia Garlick. I'm a Regional Director of Policy here in Australia.
Thank you. And I know you do have a short statement, so I will invite you to make an opening statement, and at the conclusion of those remarks, I'll invite members to ask questions, and we'll do that in an orderly fashion as well. Just for the sake of all my members online, I will begin with proceedings and I'll go across, and my aim is to provide everybody with at least 10 minutes. So if we start that as a ballpark, and then we'll come back and loop back for ongoing questions. Who's going to begin with the opening statement? Thanks, Ms Davis. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair and Deputy Chair, for the opportunity to appear here before you again. At the end of our last hearing, you had asked that our next appearance be in person, and I'm really grateful to the committee's flexibility in accommodating my travel schedule so I could be here to do this in person and answer your questions today. As the committee considers recommendations regarding online safety and well-being, I'd like to provide context on the ongoing global conversations surrounding youth online protection, particularly age assurance, that may be informative to your work. Before turning to these, I would like to recap the approach that we take on Facebook and Instagram and to promote a safe and age-appropriate experience on our services. Investing in safety is critical to our long-term safe sustainability. People will not use our services. Advertisers will not spend their money on our platform if we fail in this regard. Over the years, we have steadily increased our investment in proactive detection technology to find and remove problematic content before people report it to us. Today, for categories of content like nudity, terrorism, or child exploitation, well over 95% of the content that we remove, we take down proactively. In addition to these scaled solutions, we also have steadily built tools to allow people to customize their experience to match their individual needs and preferences, such as our comment filtering tools and our see less of this content feature. We want people, especially young people, to navigate the online world safely and confidently when they use our services. To do this and create an environment where young people can engage safely, all of this work must be informed by consultations with experts in child development, mental health, and safety. As part of our efforts to provide age-appropriate experiences, we take a multi-layered approach to understanding someone's age. We require users to provide their date of birth when they register new accounts, a tool called an age screen. Those who enter their age under 13 are not allowed to sign up. The age screen is age neutral. In other words, the options offered do not assume that someone is old enough to use our service, and we restrict people who repeatedly try to enter different birthdays into the age screen. We've been investing in and developing AI age estimation tools. While this technology is evolving and is far from perfect, it plays an important role in the safeguards we provide, and we continue to try to improve its efficacy. In addition to AI, we have teams reviewing reported accounts that appear to be used by people who are underage, and also can place checks on accounts that appear underage in the course of the normal content review. If these people are unable to meet our minimum age requirements, we delete their accounts. Where we require age verification, for example, if a teen tries to age up on our platform, we use a wide menu of options to verify age. It allows users to do so by submitting ID documents or uploading a video selfie for face-based age prediction, which is done through Yoti. That is a third-party vendor based out of the UK, which provides privacy-preserving age estimation services. Our focus on age assurance enables us to provide specific protections for those under the age of 18. These safeguards include defaulting new teen accounts to private, preventing adults over 18 from starting a private conversation on Instagram, DM, and Messenger with a teen who is not already connected with them, limiting the discoverability of a teen's account, age gating for sensitive content that we may allow on our platform for public interest, newsworthiness, or free expression value, but may be disturbing or sensitive for young users. In addition to removing content that violates our policies, we also aim to make it harder for teens to see potentially sensitive content. For example, we have a sensitive content control that's defaulted to the most restrictive setting for people under the age of 18. We also limit advertisers' ability to reach young people. We only allow advertisers to target ads to people under 18 based on their age and geography. We regularly consult with experts in adolescent development, psychology, and mental health to help make our platform safe and age-appropriate for young people, including improving our understanding of which types of content may be less appropriate for teens. We understand the importance of getting local feedback and insights as well, which is why we partner with a range of child safety and mental health partners here in Australia. For example, in November of 2023, we partnered with the Australian Federal Police Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, Kids Helpline, and a US-based organization, No Filter, to inform young people about the dangers of sextortion. This country is blessed with some of the best youth safety and mental health experts and organizations, which is why with many of them, we don't just partner on projects here in Australia, but also globally. For example, Project Protect is one of 11 organizations globally on our Safety Advisory Council. And we've just engaged Origin to update our global suicide and self-injury checkpoint. We also know that teens move interchangeably between many websites and apps. The average teenager uses dozens of applications on their phone, in some cases as many as 40 apps or more. Many of these apps have different standards or safety features, which are constantly changing or have new features added, which can be challenging for parents and guardians to keep up. I know, for example, that they were for me as a parent of my teenage daughter. Only by creating industry-wide protections will teens actually be safer. We believe there's a better way to implement legislation that will create simple, efficient ways for parents to oversee their teens' online experiences, and that is an OS and App Store-based approach to age verification. Parents should be able to approve their teens' app downloads, and we support legislation that requires app stores to get parents' approval whenever a teen under 16 downloads an app. With this solution, when a teen wants to download an app, app stores would be required to notify their parents, much like when parents are notified if their teen attempts to make an in-app purchase. Parents can decide if they want to approve the download. They can also verify the age of their teen when setting up their phone, negating the need for everyone, adults and teens alike, to verify their age multiple times across multiple apps. This way, parents can oversee and approve their teens' online activity in one place. They can ensure their teens are not accessing adult content or apps they just don't want their teens to use. And where apps like ours offer age-appropriate features and settings and parental controls, we can better ensure that parents and teens use them if this information is shared with us. This also reduces privacy concerns that some may have with the request for each app, that's 40 apps in many cases, to obtain an ID to verify a user's age. Snap, TikTok, and Match have all made public statements supporting this kind of approach, as have we. Additionally, the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children is leading a campaign in support of this approach, has offered modeled legislation, and has been urging industry in this direction. We believe the best way to help support parents and young people is a simple, industry-wide solution where all apps are held to the same consistent standard. But we aren't waiting. We continue to launch new tools on Instagram and Facebook that provide greater controls for parents. These include allowing parents to set time limits, to see who their teen is following and who is following their teen, and providing them with an option to see when their teen reports something to us. We are actively exploring how to ensure the use of these tools and advance age-appropriate experiences on our services, and we really welcome the opportunity to engage constructively in the online safety reforms and discussions happening in Australia at present. We're committed to protecting young people from abuse on our services. We'll continue working with parents, experts, industry peers across the world and with the Australian government to try to improve child safety online, not just on our services, but across the internet as a whole. And I look forward to your questions today.
Thank you. And Ms. Garlick, you're not making additional comments?
No.
Thank you. Okay, so I appreciate the opening remarks. I actually want to take us back. I appreciate your focus has been on the age verification, and I'm sure there'll be questions regarding that, but I do want to step us back to some questions that are an important part of this inquiry too around the News Media Bargaining Code. And you know, there has been speculation that you will pull all news from your platform in Australia if the Assistant Treasurer designates you under the News Bargaining Code. And at the last hearing, the committee was told that all options were on the table. I guess I'm interested in how that table's looking, and is Meta still exploring pulling all news?
That's not my area of expertise, so
I'm happy to answer that question,
that.
Chair. I don't have anything further to update. We haven't had any further engagement from the government, and so our position hasn't changed, and so we can't really comment on hypotheticals at this stage.
So the decision hasn't already been taken by Meta?
All options are on the table, but as I indicated, we haven't sort of had any indication about which way things are progressing, and so there's nothing further to update.
So Meta has not made a decision to remove news from your services if you are designated?
Well, I think we've been very clear about the concerns that we have with the legislation, that it's not sort of reflective of the economic realities of news on our services, and we have no ability to manage our liabilities and exposure under that law. So that is clearly one of the options that is on the table, but there's no sort of clear indication of the direction at this stage.
So no decision's been taken?
Correct.
If designated, will Meta enter into negotiation and arbitration and see how that arbitration goes before removing news from your services?
Well, I think we've been very clear since we first saw the exposure draft of the legislation about the problems with the legislation. It misunderstands the economics of news on our service, and there's a number of different factors. I think we listed about 5 or 6 different factors that we found to be problematic with the legislation. So from our perspective, it is unworkable legislation, and so it would be challenging for us to engage under it.
On August the 12th, Meta blocked the posting of Australian news on Facebook, and that was curious as there was no blocking of international news that I can recall. Was that an accident, or was that an intentional flexing of Meta's muscles to show, I guess, pressure on government not to go down this path of designating?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be helpful to the committee and provide some more context on that. So that was there was an error on Instagram and Threads that for a number of hours did prevent the sharing of links on both of those apps, and once we became aware of that, we rectified it.
So absolutely nothing to do, it was an accident?
Yeah, that was an error.
Thank you for clarifying that. At the last hearings, you said you couldn't speculate on how many publishers would be impacted by Meta's pulling of news from its platforms. Have you had a chance to calculate that?
No, we haven't.
Could you take that on notice? I will provide a range of questions potentially on notice.
Sure.
It is extraordinary that you wouldn't have data on how many news publishers use your system. I find it challenging, especially if you're testing in the back end on how to remove Australian news content. I would have thought you would know that.
Well, I think this has been one of the challenges that we have expressed with the legislation, that it has been difficult to know under the definitions of news content, etc., who is what is considered to be news content and things like that. So it is a challenging definition.
I might get you to take on notice in the interest of time, because I've got a lot of questions to get through,
sure.
and I want other members of the committee to have plenty of opportunity too. So maybe if you take on notice and provide information to the committee on how many news publishers would be impacted by Meta pulling news from its services in Australia, and how many Australian users would be impacted. Okay,
users.
So how many Australian users would be impacted. At the last hearing, Ms Garlick, this is a question for you. You said of the News Media Bargaining Code that the law was based on a misunderstanding of the economics, I think you've repeated that today, of the news on your platform, and was wholly unworkable from Meta's perspective. So when it comes to supporting the provision of news on Meta's services, what approaches does Meta consider to be workable?
Sure. Well, it might be helpful if I just take a step back to sort of talk through the way in which news appears, for example, on Facebook. So news appears because a publisher chooses to have a page, and then they choose what stories to share and how those are shared. And also readers of news on other platforms or on the direct channels can also choose to share content consistent with the publisher's sort of controls. And so what we have seen in terms of various different pieces of economic analysis and our own calculations is that typically publishers share links to content, which then directs the audience back onto their owned and operated properties where they can then monetise them. And we have seen a decrease in the amount of referral traffic over the years as there's been a decrease in engagement on our services with news. But when we've tried to calculate the value of that referral traffic, if people had to buy advertisements to achieve the same amount of referral traffic, I think the most recent calculation that we provided to the government was that there were 2.3 billion clicks in the calendar year 2023, and that would equate to around about $150 million of value. So I think we can see that from the data that we see, that there is value that flows back to publishers from using our services, which is why they build their strategies in terms of how to use them like that.
Has Meta ever suggested alternative approaches to government, either current or prior governments, for supporting news, either here in Australia or other jurisdictions? And if so, what has Meta suggested?
Well, if memory serves me correctly, in the early part, after the announcement of the government's response to the ACCC's digital platform inquiry in December 2019, the industry was tasked with coming up with a voluntary code, and we certainly spent the first couple of months of 2020 trying to come up with that voluntary code and had suggestions around the creation of a digital news sort of media council where industry and publishers could come together. So we had tried to make various constructive suggestions to sort of advance on the task that was outlined in the government's response, but then the decision was made to switch to a mandatory code.
I want to pick up on this suggestion that news makes up less than 3% of the Facebook feed. And I note that Meta's own the widely viewed content report, which aims to provide transparency and context about what people are seeing on Facebook. But that report is based on US data
Yes.
about US feeds. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
So the figure Meta quotes, that news makes up less than 3% of what people around the world see where posts with links to news articles, that is based on US data.
No, that's not correct, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to correct the record. I think that we had a question on notice to try to share more behind the 3% number, and so we did want to refer to various data points that were public in order to assist the committee to sort of have more insight into that 3% figure. And so we also pointed to the widely viewed content report. I acknowledge it is in relation to US data, but I think that the reference points in terms of what's happened on our platform in Canada with the removal of news and also reference points here in Australia when there's been less news on our services reaffirms that it's consistent in Australia as well.
I'll come back. So do you have data on how much news is it that Australians are seeing on Facebook? And does that figure exist, yes or no?
I'm not sure if we have it specifically. I mean, certainly the 3% figure is consistent across our services.
That's not Australian data?
I believe that's a global number, not Australian data, but we've got no reason to believe that the situation is different in Australia. Well,
I think for the purpose of this committee, it's worth being abundantly clear that if you were to make a decision to stop paying for news in Australia, has Meta made a decision to stop paying news in Australia based on extrapolated global data that may or may not be actually accurate for Australia?
Sure. I'm grateful for the opportunity to sort of provide a bit more insight into our decision not to renew the commercial deals. So the decision that we made in February of this year was to deprecate the Facebook News product, which was a product which saw an 80% decrease in usage over the calendar year 2023, and that statistic is the statistic that led us to decide to withdraw that product and to pay out but not renew the deals that were associated with that product. That's different to the calculation around the extent to which there is news within the Facebook feed, which is at 3% or less.
Look, I think we are all struggling with the 3% count. I'm going to just quickly move through some questions and then hand across to Ms Daniels next. But so I will try and get through this section swiftly for you. But I am interested in what's included in the 3% count, how Meta defines news. Is it just original news material at source, or is this as put on Facebook by New York Times, Sydney Morning Herald, whoever, ABC it might be, or does Meta also count the commentary and engagement that's promoted by news? So you might have people sharing articles, observations, comments around world news and global affairs. And does placement of news trigger a daily conversation? And if so, how does Meta measure this? And how does this have value for your users or you as a company? So there's a lot of questions in there.
There are.
And I'm happy for you to take them on notice if you need to, because I am, if news, my final question to you in this section is, if news is only 3% of Facebook feed globally, what I'd like to see a breakdown of the remaining 97% of content. Mm-hmm. I'm extremely worried about whether that 90% of content where there is no reviewed factual news media content, does that mean that 97% of your remaining content is very vulnerable to misinformation, disinformation, and there's a lot in there. You can take on some of them, but they'll all be on notice as well.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate the opportunity to come back with more details to make sure that we're being responsive to your questions. I think we do have obviously a sort of an investment in our content governance and integrity systems in terms of removing and actioning disinformation, harmful misinformation, etc. So that exists separate and independent of news shared by mainstream media publishers on our platform. But I do think, and this is part of the reason why we did start the transparency process with the widely viewed content report, we were trying to show that the vast majority of times people are connecting with friends, families, groups, pages that they might follow, and that can be a wide number of different things in their community that might not come within the rubric of our integrity efforts on dis and misinformation, and also may not be mainstream media news, and for the vast majority of cases are not mainstream media news. Okay, I will put a bunch of things on notice for you, but in the interest of time, because I've gone over my time, so I better watch it. Ms Daniels, across to you next.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll stick with you, Ms Garlick, on the issue of the 3% news traffic. So I put a question on notice, which you've been referencing, and the response back from Meta was that you rely on what the Chair's referenced, the widely viewed content report, which is in effect calculated with respect to the US data. I think the core of the problem here is that the University of Canberra, for example, in their digital news report says that, for example, Facebook, YouTube and Instagram are the top social media platforms for news among Australians, that social media as a main source of news among Gen Z has actually risen to 60%, for example. and that Instagram's now the top social media platform, so it is a meta platform for Gen Z, and there's a range of other data within that report that I won't go through in the interest of time. But there's an innate contradiction between what you're saying and what the Australian data shows, and in the answer that you've responded to the question on notice with, you've just asked us to rely on an assumption that the US data extrapolates to the Australian situation, which according to the University of Canberra's research, it does not. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, I think the first point to make relying on Australia-specific data is that when there has been less or no news here in Australia on our services, there's been no impact on user engagement or revenue. So that again suggests that it is not a significant proportion of our services. But also, I think we have discussed the challenges with some of this survey data. It is stated recollection. And also, people might be, it's hard to know when people are talking about news, what type of news they're talking about. For example, I get news from my local council, I get news from bands I follow. There's a whole range of things that might qualify as news that people get from a wide range of different sources on the platform. So I think, I think also when we unpacked some of the survey questions, they talked about people, discussing news as well, which I think goes to some of the chair's questions as well. So in terms of the data that we're looking at, we're looking at mainstream media news data and looking at the extent to which there is link data to mainstream media sites.
Okay, but so the point of the question on notice and the point of this line of questioning is that as a federal government committee making policy on this, and this is a serious matter, which goes to the core of our democracy actually, access to news, you're asking us to rely in your own answer on what you're saying, which is this data is only calculated with respect to the US, and there's no reason to believe that the findings are not also applicable in Australia. So you're asking us to rely on your assumption without providing us with any data. And then the next question on notice was, would you allow an independent researcher to assess that data, whatever data you've got? And you've said no to that. So you're asking us to rely on, in effect, two non-answers.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity to correct the record. I think the first point to note is... but
it's not correcting the record, Ms Garlick. These are your answers to our questions. I'm reading directly from a transcript that you provided to us, to be clear.
Sure. Maybe if I can help provide some more context. I think the first point to make is that our platforms are but one way in which people can connect and access news. So obviously, there's direct readership, there's lots of other different channels. So ours is not the sort of the sole channel. What we were attempting to do in relation to our response to your question on notice, because you had wanted to see the underlying data that underpinned it, we were trying to use the widely viewed content report as an illustrative example, and then back that up with other publicly available data points specific to Australia to indicate that it is a common trend also here in Australia. So we did offer it in an effort to be helpful. Okay,
well, so what I'm saying to you, or what I'm asking you for, and obviously it's on notice, is I think we need some more rigorous or substantive information on this to place trust in that number of 3%. And I don't have a lot of faith in it in the way that it's been framed. I'm going to move on in the interests of time. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, recently admitted that Meta had censored content in response to requests made by the Biden administration. Did any of those requests which were made by a foreign government affect content seen by Australian users?
I'm not aware that they did.
And has the Australian government ever made any requests of a similar nature outside of the processes provided under the OSA?
We've provided transparency in our transparency reports. I think we're up to our third or fourth one now in terms of removals for harmful health misinformation. I know that we were receiving requests from the Australian government during the height of the pandemic, but I don't have data on the extent to which we action those or not. But certainly we've tried to disclose all the removals that we made for harmful health misinformation during the pandemic in our transparency reports.
So could we request on notice any further information that you have in regard to adherence to those requests? On age verification, again, in the interests of time, Ms Davis, you spoke about your preference for a sort of either device or app store approach to the gateway in terms of parental approval rather than a meta-specific approach. Is that, to be blunt, is that meta shirking responsibility for age verification or safety? Or if not, on what basis, from a technical point of view, do you think that's the best approach?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, because I do think that that is a point that has come up repeatedly in our support for this position, and I'd like to explain. Most of the age assurance that's done across industry has limitations. So whether it's asking for an ID and then creating an additional privacy violation to take a whole slew of information that is unnecessary to assess age, or using an age estimation classifier which has some level of accuracy but is not entirely accurate because it's not based in sort of a ground truth verification from a user. All of these things provide some level of assurance. We're still committed to doing that kind of assurance on our platform. What we're really saying is that we need a multi-layered approach, and app stores or the OS, the operating system, have access to this information already. They have it, for example, in providing for in-app purchases and knowing who are teens to then allow parents to approve those in-app purchases. And what we would appreciate is for them to share that across the body of apps that are being offered in their app store. We, for example, do this in our app store on Quest. We provide an API with age to developers. It enables us to put a layer of security. The reason that this is particularly important for parents goes to what I said in my opening statement. Teens use dozens of apps, as many as 40 or more on average. And when they are using that many apps, it is very hard for a parent to know all of those apps. I can say I'm in the industry, and I'm pretty sure that I was not aware of every app that my daughter was using when she was a teen. But I did have an app store, and if I were to get a notification, that would have made me aware and given me an opportunity to actually make a decision on whether she could download that app or not. Also, just if it's, go ahead, let me stop, and then I can add another piece, but go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, because we are short of time, and I do have a couple more questions. Further to this, isn't it true to say that in the US, your industry lobby body, NetChoice, is suing states that are seeking to implement age standards, yet you're telling us that you're okay with this approach as long as you don't have to do it? So there seems to be a range of contradictions there. So you will support some level of age assurance or age verification as long as you don't have to do it yourselves. Is that what it comes down to?
No, that's not how I would describe our position. In the case of legislation in the states, some of this legislation is connected to other constitutional issues in relation to sharing data, to access content. That said, we will continue to do layers of age assurance. We are not trying to shift the responsibility entirely to the App Store. And in the legislation that we are pushing for, we have also included provisions that would require apps like ours to then facilitate and provide an age-appropriate experience. One of the challenges, for example, that we have with our parental controls is being able to know who a parent is and to be able to access and make sure that we give those controls directly to parents rather than trying to go through their teen. And by doing this through the App Store, we would be in a position to connect directly to that parent and then to provide those safeguards.
Okay. I will have a whole bunch of questions on notice as the chair does, but I'm going to go to the Facebook files, Frances Haugen's leaks, and specifically the People You May Know feature, which was identified within the Facebook files as a risk to young people in terms of leading to inappropriate adult minor content. Can you speak to us about the People You May Know feature as it operates today? Has it been switched off for under 18s in Australia?
It is not switched off for under 18s in Australia. We do have safeguards in place. So we use, for example, artificial intelligence or classifiers to try to identify accounts that may be potentially suspicious, for example, or engaging in a suspicious way. It doesn't mean that they're violating our policies, but we may see, for example, that they are sending out a slew of requests to teens that we don't see them connected to. We use these signals to try to identify those accounts, and we will not share teens to those accounts. So we will not push them through People You May Know to those accounts.
So just to be clear, Facebook files said that People You May Know feature contributed up to 75% of all inappropriate adult minor contact. And it was a Facebook staffer that said, could simply turn this feature off, but we've opted to leave it in place instead. The staffer says, how on earth have we not just turned off People You May Know between adults and children? Now, just before this hearing, I went through my own phone and put in People You May Know on my own Facebook page, and a whole bunch of kids popped up who are linked to people that I know. So children of people that I know, friends of my own children. Is that not an easy, potentially harmful gateway that you could just close? Why would you leave it open?
People rely on People You May Know, particularly when they're first join the platform, to identify, to be connected to the people that are in their connections. So whether you mentioned just a minute ago, maybe your niece or your nephew that's connected to, if you were connected to your sister or brother on the platform, being able to know your particular niece versus another one with another individual with a similar name. People You May Know help people to connect. They help kids to connect, or adults to connect if they are part of a team or a community. That said, we take discoverability of teens very seriously on our platform. We've put in place safeguards with regard to People You May Know to try to filter out potentially unsafe accounts. We take sort of a very extraordinarily cautious approach with regard to those types of individuals. We also limit the ability, for example, for people to search for teens on the platform. We don't allow offline visibility through search of teens' Facebook accounts. So we do try to limit the discoverability without shutting down the entire functionality of the platform. We also are working with experts in this area to explore additional ways to safeguard that discoverability. And I take your comments and will, of course, consider them as we continue to build out safeguards.
Okay, I'll put the rest on notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms Daniels. I'm going to go to Dr Merlino next. Over to you, Dr Merlino.
Thanks, Chair. So I have a couple of questions on age assurance and verification. The government is conducting a $6.5 million trial to determine the effectiveness of available technologies to prevent access to online pornography by children and young people under the age of 18, and age-limiting access to social media platforms for an age range of between 13 and 16 years. Just kind of building on some of the themes which the Chair and Ms Daniel raised, in your view, what is the role of social media platforms in applying age assurance principles and technology as part of the stack, which I believe is how the department refers to multi-layered technology approaches?
Yeah, we do consider ourselves part of the stack, and we do believe that we have a role to play. As I mentioned earlier, we think that the OS or App Store is a very important first layer, and it also provides a consistency across the industry, which we think is critical to doing this well. We know that, like all age assurance mechanisms, none of them are perfect, and so we will continue to have layers. So, for example, that includes developing technology that tries to predict age on the platform and then using that to verify age. Or I mentioned in my statement, when we see someone try to change their age on the platform, so teens who try to change their age to being older, we will actually put them through a verification. The challenge here for the industry is trying to balance that with also privacy issues and trying not to create numerous new privacy intrusions, and also challenges for parents to do this across many apps. And so finding a way to layer this is what we hope to accomplish.
And so just for my clarity, so you've talked about, for example, the role of the App Store, but you do agree that there is a role for social media to be playing?
Absolutely, yes, we do. We do agree, and we believe there's a role for social media and apps to provide the kinds of tools to both safeguards and defaults for teens, and then also tools for parents, so that when they have this information, they can be more easily involved in their teens' life. Because the bottom line is parents do know their teens best, and the defaults that we put in place are defaults for teens at scale. And there may be instances in which a teen needs additional safeguards than what's offered at scale.
Are there any other aspects of the stack that you might want to identify as possibly being effective for age verification or age assurance?
I think that I've tried to identify, and certainly I can go back and provide a detailed, response. But I think there is the OS. I think there is asking age at sign up. I think there is using age modeling and classifiers to identify age liars. I think it's important, for example, to have reporting mechanisms. So if someone sees an account that looks underage that may have slipped through any one of these layers, there's an opportunity for them to report it and for us to review it. I think we do this in the normal course of a lot of our content review as well. If we identify a potentially underage account, pushing them into age verification. So there are roles for all of us to play in this.
The trial seeks to assess the effectiveness of a range of technologies and approaches, and we know that the issue of age verification and assurance more broadly is being grappled with at a global level. Just wondering if you could please outline how Meta is currently seeking to enforce age limits on its platforms, what protocols it has in place to deal with known breaches of terms of service with regards to age, and what, if any, additional measures it's considering to bolster assurance of age for young people.
Yes, and I saw the eSafety Commissioner's announcement today and the BOES process, and we are eager, I think, to participate in that process and to provide additional data there as well. We use a number of processes that I outlined in my opening statement. So asking age at sign up, putting in place a type of system age screen that doesn't favor age lying, that actually helps identify potential age lying if people are repeatedly trying to change their age, and then blocking them from accessing the app. In addition, when we see, as I mentioned, teens, if they try to age up, we will actually put them through a verification flow. We have specific reporting for underage accounts, and when someone reports an underage account, we will review that account, and if it looks to be underage and there's a signal, we'll actually put them through a verification process involving either an ID or a facial age estimation through Yoti. In addition, if in the context of looking and reviewing content we see a potentially underage account, we also will require some type of verification. And for certain parts of our service, so we have a dating app within our service, and through that dating, you have obligations to verify age as well.
And given that we're in such a dynamic environment, are you evaluating the effectiveness of some of these other mechanisms to ensure that you're constantly adjusting what you're doing so that it's as effective as possible?
Sorry to interrupt. We have tried to examine the effectiveness of this. We've actually engaged in a number of industry efforts to understand the effectiveness, as well as working with teens and parents, and have done some labs, even working with policymakers to understand some of the effectiveness. I think that one of the things that we're quite focused on right now is the effectiveness of age modeling and age prediction tools. They are not as effective as we would like them to be, and I think it's a particular challenge because we aren't working from what people would call sort of a ground truth to measure the effectiveness of those tools. So we can make an estimation based on signals on the platform. For example, if someone is on the platform, they've stated their age is 17, and we were to get, we see a post that says happy, 14th birthday, that's, one of the types of signals we can use to estimate age, but it's not, we don't know for certain that that's the truth of the age, which is one of the reasons that we really think that that initial layer from the App Store or the online service or the device is incredibly important, because they do have that access, because they do have that connection to the parent to also attest and verify that age.
So look, I might come back with some questions on notice around some of your evaluations and research. So we heard, just speaking of or segueing to the eSafety Commissioner, at our 21 June hearing, the eSafety Commissioner said that our research shows that almost 2/3 of 14 to 17-year-olds have viewed extremely harmful content in the past year, including drug abuse, suicide or self-harm, and gory or violent material. More than a quarter were exposed to content promoting unhealthy eating habits and disordered eating. So, I mean, you've talked a bit about this, but just interested in unpacking. So beyond age assurance, can you just talk us through what other forms of protection are in place or would be considered by platforms in a stacked approach to preventing young people from accessing this type of harmful content?
Absolutely. In fact, we really do think of age assurance in some ways as that first layer. I'll speak specifically to content because that's something that you just asked about. We have a number of safeguards in place, some of them based on age gating, for example. So we have content and policies that are designed to be for everybody on the platform, and we work with experts to ensure that we're providing an age-appropriate experience. There is some content on the platform that we may want to allow because it is particularly newsworthy or relevant, but that may be sensitive to teens. In those cases, we have age gating so that the teens will not see that content. This is why age assurance can be so incredibly important. We also have something called a sensitive content control. So this is for content that doesn't necessarily violate our policies, but may sit at the edges of those policies and be sensitive for younger users. That's set to the strictest setting by default for those who are under the age of 18. An example, because you mentioned sort of eating disorders, is examples of that type of content where we have people who, we don't allow the glorification or the promotion of eating disorders on our platform, but we may have people who are discussing an eating disorder on the platform, even someone that a teen is friends with who may be sharing this kind of content. And because that may be particularly sensitive to teens, the sensitive content control will help to filter out that content.
So, sorry to interrupt, but just that it's useful for you to step through different mechanisms, but what would you say to the assertion that the eSafety Commissioner's evidence, which pointed to 2/3 of 14 to 17-year-olds viewing extremely harmful content and more than a quarter being exposed to the unhealthy eating habits or disordered eating? Like, it doesn't seem as though it's effective at this point.
Well, I think this is why age assurance is particularly important. I think that will improve the effectiveness of all of the apps that teens are using in this regard. I also think that we continue to try to advance our classifiers in this area to ensure that we are removing that kind of content, and also our understanding of that content changes and people's behavior on the platform changes. And so we do find that people will make efforts to get around our rules in this area, and so we have to constantly engage in updating our work in this area. I do think, one of the things in our legislation that we talked about that may be really valuable to what you're talking about is a push for industry standards around what is age appropriate for those under the age of 18. And I would even argue that trying to bucket that between 13 and 15 and 16 and 18, similar to what you might see in the context of movies, would be very important. So if you think about what we're saying, if you had that ability for a parent to approve the download of an app, and inside of that process they could see this app provides this type of content in relation to what's considered age appropriate, they would be in a much better position to make those kinds of decisions. So we would like to see standards around what is considered age appropriate content for people under the age of 18.
So just given what we've been discussing and the fact that based on the Safety Commissioner's evidence, there are significantly high and concerning rates of access, has Meta considered efforts to address harms caused through recommender systems and algorithms?
I'm not sure I totally understand your question, but let me speak to recommender systems and algorithms, and hopefully I'll address it, and if I don't, obviously, feel free to interrupt me. We use our algorithms in multiple different ways, and people tend to kind of talk about them as one whole thing. There are algorithms that recommend content, and in the context of in that context, we take an even stricter approach to what we recommend to people on the platform than what our policies, what would be policy violating. In addition, we use algorithms in other ways. So, for example, we use algorithms for safety purposes, algorithms to, for example, the sensitive content control, to actually filter out content that we think may be age inappropriate through that sensitive content control. So algorithms can play a role in recommending, and we need to have rules around that, and we have stricter rules in relation to the recommendations of content. Algorithms can also help us to filter out content that may be age inappropriate as well. So that's similar to what our sensitive content control does.
Are there situations in which your algorithms, in terms of what they put in front of people or what they might, recommend to young people, are there risks that they're sometimes making it worse?
We work very hard to try to put in place the types of rules and safeguards so that they don't do that. We do and have had things reported to us where we have seen, as you're probably familiar with some of the news stories, where we've seen content that's been recommended that we would not want to recommend, and we are working to ensure that we aren't doing that. One of the things that we've also tried to do is that, again, these things work at scale, and you may have individual users who may be more sensitive to a particular type of content. So, for example, if someone suffers from disordered eating, even ordinary fitness content may be problematic for them to see. So we have a feature where they can, what you call long press on Explore, which is an area where we recommend content, to say they want to see less of that content, so that where our algorithms are working at scale, we can also enable people to personalize that experience based on their needs. These systems are not perfect, and they are ever improving, and that is one of the reasons we work closely with experts in these various issue areas you've mentioned.
And one of the issues I see, and this will be my last question because I'm conscious of time, but I mean, you know, you make the assertion that, you know, algorithms can be used in many instances to achieve certain protections. And in theory, I've no doubt that's true. I mean, one of the issues I think for regulators is that many of the ways in which algorithms work in your systems are quite complex and opaque. And this is one of the challenges, I think, from a regulatory perspective, is that it's just as plausible that algorithms in some contexts might make things worse. And it just seems to me that we've got complex and constantly changing algorithms, and it's very difficult to know what the net impact is.
We've tried to provide significant transparency around our algorithms, but I take your point. I think one of the things that we are also doing right now and recently announced, which may be helpful to regulators in determining how to think about these issues, is something called registered reports. It's with the Center for Open Science, where they can look at data from our platform and have access to data from our platform to understand the potential impact of content of the algorithms that are that are supplying or content in a particular feed. But I do understand we try to provide greater transparency and would be happy to work with you all on how to accomplish getting you the kinds of things you need to legislate.
And if I can just build on Antigone's comments, I mean, there's the systems cards that show the signals that go into the ranking and recommender systems across a range of different surfaces. I think we're up to 22 different system cards, and for each post, you can click on it to see why you're seeing this and the interests that have been assigned to you in case that is getting it wrong. And then we also have nudges if people have been looking at a piece of or a topic for a long period of time. So we are trying to make sure that we are providing transparency, but obviously that builds on some of the other analysis and work that's being done.
No, well, I'm sure, I'll, like all the members of the committee, there's much more I would have liked to have engaged in, but thank you for your time before the committee and for your evidence, and I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Dr. Molino, and everyone is sticking to around the 15-minute mark, so I really appreciate that. And I'm going to hand now across to Mr. Wallace. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, Mr. Wallace. Yep, over to you.
Thanks very much.
You are a yep, okay.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, a little bit soft, but okay.
I'm often not described as being soft. Yeah,
First time for everything, Mr. Wallace.
First time for everything. All right, thanks very much for appearing in person, Ms. Davis. I appreciate you have made a long trip, so thanks for that. Media reports this week say that the age verification trial the government has announced is yet to start.
Sorry, Mr. Wallace, can I just interrupt you? It's really not great audio quality. Are you able, if you take your mic off, because I think it's...
Is that any better?
I think...
Is that any better?
Marginally, yes. Let's...
I'm not sure why.
Just it's not very clear. I'm just wondering if the mic on your computer is any, or are you not in a position where you can do that? No.
No, the mic on the computer will definitely not.
It does sound a bit better now, so go ahead. Sorry, let's give it a crack. Yep.
Thanks. Media reports this week say that the age verification trial that the government has recently announced is yet to start. Do you know the status of the age verification trial and what's been requested of you by the federal government in relation to working in that trial?
I'm not sure
Yeah.
I could hear you. I apologize.
I think you're asking on the status of the age verification trial and what information has been requested of us as part of the age verification trial. Is that correct, Andrew?
That's correct.
Great. Okay. We've engaged in some initial conversations to share information about the age assurance tools that we have. And as Antigone mentioned, and as was reported in the media today, we've received a what's now colloquially termed in the industry a BOSE notice, so a basic online safety expectations notice, requesting a number of pieces of information from us about the ways in which those age assurance tools work on our platform.
Okay, but has the age verification trial started?
I'm not across the details of that. I'm just across the information that's been requested of us.
Okay, that's just in relation to what the eSafety Commissioner has provided in the last 24 hours.
There's also been another initial consultation to ask us about the way in which age assurance works on the platform that's occurred with the department. Okay,
but the trial that would require platforms such as Meta to undertake age verification or age assurance, whatever you might call it, that hasn't started yet, has it?
Not as far as I'm aware. I'm not across those details.
Pardon me, may I ask a question of you? Do you mean, are we supposed to initiate the trial, or are you saying has the trial that is being initiated by the government?
Yes, so the trial that's being initiated by the government, which is for age assurance, have you been notified that you have to comply for the purposes of this trial with putting steps in place to provide age assurance for your customers?
No, we haven't had any communication of that nature.
Okay, so I think the answer to your question is that the age verification trial hasn't started as far as Meta is concerned.
Well, I guess that's why I was trying to ask the question. We haven't been asked to initiate that trial, but what I think I want to make sure we're clear about is that we do take age assurance measures already, regardless of this trial.
I understand that you say that Meta does this as part of your layered mechanisms, but I'm just trying to clarify that Meta has not been required by the government to initiate, as part of the government age assurance trial, certain steps and measures.
Not that I am aware of, or Mia.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was interested to hear that Meta was in favour of federal legislation regarding age verification, and I take your opening statement, Ms Davis, to mean that I think you said parents should be able to approve their teens' app downloads, and we support federal legislation that requires app stores to get parent approval when their teen under 16 download apps. So the basic premise of your position is that you do support federal legislation that would require some form of age assurance. Is that right?
Not any form of age assurance. I think this is really important. What we're trying to do is to support an age assurance mechanism that is less privacy intrusive and simpler for parents, and also helps enable parents to approve an app download, and trying to do this where parents are at. I don't know if you have teenage children, but my teenagers now...
I'm past that, thankfully.
Yeah, me too, thankfully. But my daughter's now 27, but when she was a teen and had access to these apps, there was no way for me to say yes or no. In giving her that phone, with the access to the App Store, I couldn't stop other than, I want to say no way, I could take the phone away or I could ask her, but there wasn't a simple way within the system for me to say yes or no to a particular app, and also to verify her age and make sure that she was actually putting in truthfully her age. And so this would enable parents to really do that simply. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't do the mechanisms that we're doing to then further assure that we don't have age liars. But it would just provide a simple way for parents to do it across the many, many apps without require them to give their ID or their teen's ID to 40 different apps, some of which do not have and will not have the kinds of security and safety protocols for data that you will find across the larger apps.
But in saying that, your response to my question is predicated on involvement of parents and parents, in effect, doing the right thing. Now, we know there's a study done in the UK which identified that, I can't remember the exact number of parents that were effectively approving young people under 13 from going onto your platform, not just your platform, but many other platforms. But your response is predicated on parents doing the right thing. But we already know that some parents aren't doing the right thing.
That's why it's also important to have the other layers. There is no system that is 100% accurate, and that's why we would have these other layers in place, and we'll continue to use these other layers to try to provide an age, to have the best awareness of age.
Ms. Davis, I don't want to cut you short, and I'm not being trying to be rude, but we've got a lot of work to get through, so if I can just try and get you to keep your answers as punchy as you possibly can, I'd really appreciate that. And by the way, can you hear me better now?
A little bit.
Okay, all right. In a tweet on the 3rd of March 2023, Meta President for Global Affairs, Nick Clegg, said that age verification testing on Instagram in the US saw a 96% success rate for those trying to change their age. Now, to me, that demonstrates two things. Firstly, it says that there's no reason that Meta and other platforms can't enforce age verification on their sites. And secondly, it says that you agree that children are not safe online and that age verification, while not a fix-all, would be a valuable tool. Given your history and now current position with respect to age verification, in that you said that you think that federal legislation should be enacted, do you accept that it's the social media platform, not the App Store, which is being used to perpetrate the sort of bad things that we see on the internet, on social media platforms, the scams, the foreign interference, the sexual misconduct that we see, the sextortion, that sort of stuff?
I think I got most of your question. I think that teens use 40 different apps or more in many cases, dozens of apps, and we need a simple way for parents to be able to approve the use of those apps. I think that the harms that we see, potential harms that we see across the internet, apply across the internet. They are on websites, they can be on social media apps, they can be on gaming apps. There are a wide variety of apps that enable teens to engage in many different ways where you have to put safeguards in place to ensure that they are protected. Awareness of age improves those safeguards. We take measures to understand and be aware of those ages. We also think that a layer at the App Store is really important. The App Store is essentially the gatekeeper for these apps. The operating system is the gatekeeper for these apps, and they have this information. And if you think about for a parent or for a teen for that matter, providing that information, providing their ID across the internet to numerous different apps and services isn't necessarily a safe and secure way to get at age. Using what is information that the app stores already have is a way to create that first layer. We do it on Quest, so we have what's called an age API, and the game developers on Quest can access this age API to then ensure that they are providing the safeguards that they have in place for the identified age through that API.
But the problem with your position in relation to pushing this issue of age verification onto the App Store is that people can still get access to your platforms other than via an app. They can jump on their phone via the web page. They can do it on a desktop. They can do it on a laptop. So it's not just the issue of using your product through an app that's going to be the panacea, is it?
That's why we also would like to see this apply to the operating system as well, to address issues like websites, and to the extent that the App Store or the online, the operating system have any additional gaps thus thereafter, then having that responsibility sit with the app makes great sense, because that sits outside of that ecosystem. But this is really designed to provide a broad and simple approach for parents. I know as a parent for myself, trying to figure this out across every single app was just not feasible. So.
But if all apps, I mean, you would want to see a level playing field. You've said that as much in your evidence today. And that's understandable from a commercial perspective. You want to see a level playing field. If the federal government brought in legislation which required some form of age assurance, not just on Meta, obviously, but on other platforms, then there's your level playing field.
What I would say is that, first of all, that puts a tremendous burden on regulators to know all of those 40 apps that a teen is using or more, to actually check and verify those systems. I still think it creates that lack of simplicity for parents and really doesn't empower parents in the way that the industry should. So I think that legislation can certainly provide for age assurance obligations for apps as well, in terms of where you sit outside of the OS or you would sit outside of the App Store, and ensuring that in those instances they are also doing their additional gatekeeping part. But it is much simpler to start with that first layer. We're not suggesting that there shouldn't be additional efforts made by companies to assure age. We're not suggesting that at all. And in fact, we, in the legislation that we're proposing, want to ensure that there are obligations for apps to then provide age-appropriate experiences and to create standards that are uniform across industry for parents. Again, parents, when they go to watch a movie or allow their child to watch a movie, they have something to base that on. At present, they don't have that across the apps that their teens are using. So we also want to see that as part of the legislation. This is not a burden-shifting exercise. It is actually trying to solve a problem for parents and make it simpler.
If the federal government legislated for a form of age assurance across all platforms, parents would have some degree of comfort that if a platform is operating in this country, that they should feel confident that their under 16-year-old will not be able to get access to it.
I would feel far less confident as a parent if there was just a standard and people had to chase all the different apps that teens use. There are numerous apps. They're changing on an ongoing basis. Many of the apps may not be located in a particular country, may not be the kinds of companies that you're in.
They would be in breach of the Australian law if they didn't comply with federal legislation. They would be in breach of Australian law.
It would, if you have a standard, it would certainly be a breach of Australian law. I think parents would be in rest far more assured if this was done with an initial layer at the OS and App Store level.
Okay, I just want to go, I am conscious of the time.
Mr.
Yes,
Wallace,
Chair.
I'm going to go to Susan in a minute and I can come back to you. I just need to sort of keep filtering through on our time cycle.
You need to share the love.
Sharing the love. Although I just wanted to follow up on something that we've been discussing there, really. And I'm just wondering from Meta's perspective with the eSafety BOS notice that's been issued, is Meta aware that data being compiled there around the technical capacity, I guess, regarding age assurance is going to inform the trial itself?
No, I mean, I don't think we've had a briefing on the details of how the trial will be operated. We've received a BOS notice similar to many other BOS notices that we've received, and so we're putting that through our usual processes. All
right, I'm going to hand it across to Susan Templeman now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for the evidence you've given this afternoon. I'm going to try and keep my questions tight so that you don't have to give long answers, and hopefully that will help us move through. So the first one is just about my understanding about how ads on Facebook and Instagram are verified, vetted and approved by Meta before they turn up on a page. Can you confirm that process, that if there is a verification, a vetting, and then an approval?
Sure. So at a high level, ads are designed to, that people are required to agree that they adhere to our policies, and then there's an automated system for review, and then there's additional reviews that happen depending on how much traction the ad gets after being published or other systems that we run post-publication.
So when it comes to ads that are essentially scam ads, what is the number of reported scam ads that Meta's received from users in Australia over the last 12 months?
I don't think that we have that data to hand, and part of the reason that we don't have that to hand is that increasingly we're trying to look at strategic network disruptions so that we're not just taking down ads on a sort of a per ad basis. What we're seeing with scam ads is that it's a highly adversarial space, and so we've had to really double down on our investment and investigation on it to try to make sure that we're able to take it down at scale at the actor layer and not just at the content layer.
So you can't tell us how many ads that have impacted users in Australia have been reported? You can't even tell us the reporting amount?
I don't have that to hand. I'm happy to see if we can make that available as a follow-up.
Yeah, it seems unusual to me. I imagine that is data you collect when I'm an Australian and I report something. I'd like to see that data, please. So in terms of giving a number of scam ads that have been identified and taken down in Australia in the last 12 months, what data do you have on that?
I certainly don't have that to hand, I'm afraid. We have been, as I mentioned earlier, there's sort of 3 different ways that we can enforce our policies, and increasingly we're doing that both proactively and then also doing it at this, what we call strategic network disruption layer. So it's at an actor layer where we might be taking down, dozens of accounts or more that may also take down, both pages and ad accounts.
Well, if you could take that one on notice and provide us with a number of scam ads that have been identified and taken down in Australia or for Australian consumption, that would be whatever data you've got on that, I think would be useful. So when a scammer puts an ad up, are they able to use, if it gets through your system, your vetting and your verification system, are they able to use the various tools on the platform to target specific people? Whether it be people over 65, whether it be Indigenous Australians or those living in a remote area, are they able to use tools to target specific groups such as those and others?
So if a person creates an ad on the platform, they have access to the publicly available ad creation flow, yes.
And that would include being able to target to over 65, say?
I'd have to double check. There have been a number of restrictions based on different categories, so I'm happy to come back to you to make sure I'm being responsive to your question.
The issue around these scam ads is that clearly they are getting through your vetting process and your verification process. They are turning up and people are reporting them and people are also being hit by them. So would you have any estimate on the value of advertising revenue that Meta has actually received from ads you've removed in Australia in the last year?
I think in terms of the way that scammers operate, you're right, it's a highly adversarial space and, there's a number of different industries, obviously, that are involved in trying to deepen our collaboration. That's why we've established a deeper escalation channel with the banks so that we can just get one URL from them and then fan out at scale to take down a large number of networks. The amount of obviously this is bad for our business. It's bad for consumers. It's bad for a wide range of people who are engaging on our services, and so we've been doubling down our investment to try to do everything we can to identify and thwart this as much as possible.
But it is fair to say that there is advertising revenue you're receiving that comes from those scam ads.
I think there is some revenue, but obviously there's also significant cost in us trying to identify and thwart this and try to do everything we can to stop these networks from operating on our services.
I'm fairly new to this committee, so I've read through some of the evidence that's been given previously. And what I'm struggling to accept, I suppose, is the lack of data on some of these things when you have so much data on so many other things. Are you able to take on notice to provide us with some data about the revenue, the number of scam ads that you've identified? Obviously there may be some that you have not identified and taken down, but where you've identified it and taken it down, what I'd like to know is what revenue for Meta was connected to that. Could you take that on notice, please?
Yeah, sure. And what we have also tried to do, because I understand that people, that many members of the committee want confirmation on data. What we did try to do in our submission was provide details about the different law enforcement and other requests we've had from Australian regulators as they're seeking to prosecute scams, and then we have also brought prosecutions against scammers in different jurisdictions, including here in Australia. And we've tried to provide evidence of that just so that you have more details around the scale and the number of concrete steps that we're taking to be responsive here. But I'm happy to take that on notice.
Thank you. And what I'm interested in is that revenue that you get when you know that it has been connected to a scam, whether it's a scam you've taken action against or someone else has. What do you do with the revenue that was earned when those scam ads are removed?
Sure, I'm happy to come back to you with more details on that. Obviously, we're doubling down our investment in trying to identify and remove all of these malicious actors. And I also think, we see only one aspect of a scam. There's obviously a range of different platforms that a scammer bases their operations on, so removal on one platform doesn't take down their whole operation, and that's why we've been steadily stepping up our efforts to try to thwart scams. But I'm happy to see what more we can share with you to assist you in looking at this issue.
I assume you don't keep that revenue that has been derived from illegal activity.
No, our goal is to make sure that we are stopping this illegal activity and doing everything we can to combat it.
No, but I'm talking about the revenue that you have earned, not by your illegal activity, but by somebody else's. That is revenue you have earned. Am I right in assuming that, do you keep that revenue or do you do something else with it?
Well, obviously we're doubling down our investments to stop these things from being there in the first place, and obviously there are certain circumstances in which we're reimbursing customers where the scam has been completed on our services. But as I mentioned, in a large number of instances, scams are not being completed on our services.
So, but in some instances, you know they still are.
Well, to the extent that we're still taking them down, then obviously there are still, fake accounts, hacked accounts, etc. Yes.
Okay, so just to be clear, you don't actually know how much money Meta is profiting from criminals who are essentially stealing money from hardworking Australians who are using your social media platforms, and you can't actually say whether you're profiting from illegal scam activity on the platforms.
Well, I think I can quite confidently say we're not profiting, given the amount of work that is involved in trying to stay a step ahead of this adversarial space and continue to both identify networks that we can take down, roll out on-platform tools, engage in deeper escalations and engage in broader investigations, collaborate with law enforcement and bring off-platform actions as well. That's a very sizable investment that we're doing to try to combat that, given there are dedicated malicious actors that are operating across a range of different industries and a range of different platforms and a range of different countries to perpetrate these scams.
I mean, what I read in between the lines there is that any money that you do get from the advertising they've done, you're essentially saying, well, we spend more than that to stop it, so therefore it, there's no actual it doesn't sound like there's an actual process to return money stolen from people back to them.
Well, I think the important thing to understand is that to the extent that a scam is perpetrated on our services that is connecting to ordinary Australians, typically the completion of that scam will not be happening on our services.
No, but along the way you've profited from it, from the advertising, right?
I mean, I'm trying to say that the amount of investment that is happening at the moment to try to thwart this, I'm not sure that I can agree with that characterisation.
But you do earn advertising revenue from those scams.
In some instances, there may be that. Obviously, these are being conducted in a variety of different ways and they're not necessarily connected through to advertising revenue.
Last time Meta gave evidence, I think it was something like a comment that you weren't aware of how much money Australians have lost because of scam ads on your platforms. Is that still the case, that you're not sure how much money Australians have lost, or are you able to provide a dollar figure based on work that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we tried to do in our submission was provide data around the requests from law enforcement and the work that we do with Australian regulators to give the committee a sense of the scale. As I mentioned, in a large number of instances, I mean, obviously if you look at a scam attack chain, our services are only one part of that, and typically the completion of the scam does not happen on our services. In order to be helpful to the committee in response to previous questions from our last hearing, we certainly tried to look in terms of any notifications that we'd received from Australians in relation to this, and were unable to identify any. So we've tried to be responsive to previous questions, but obviously you've given us a number of different questions on notice, and I'm happy to follow up on those. So
one question I don't know whether you were asked this previously, is when a user reports a scam via Meta's channels to you, do you explicitly ask them to nominate the dollar figure that they've lost after they've been scammed by that one on your platform? Is that information you seek?
I haven't looked at the reporting flow recently, but typically, people can report it for a particular category, and I'd have to check if there was a free form box for people to add that in.
I mean, would it make sense to be asking them to let you know the sort of size of loss they may have experienced. Would that be useful information for you to have?
No, I think obviously when people are seeing content on our service and they're concerned that it's not authentic or that the page has been hacked or that the account has been hacked, that is quite often not associated with a dollar figure loss. That's just generally observing some kind of behaviour or content on the platform that suggests that it's not authentic and doesn't comply with our policies, and that can be well before a scam loss occurs. So for us, it's about trying to get that signal really early and trying to make sure that we're able to then use any user reports that we get, although the large majority of our investment in trying to combat this is happening much higher up from user reports at this point in time, given the sophistication involved. But we're certainly, trying to get signal as soon as possible, well before there's a scam loss.
And when you are aware that one of your customers, your users, has been scammed and lost, it's always hard-earned money. None of it's ever easy money. They've lost hard-earned money via one of your platforms. That's the way the scammer has reached them. Do you compensate people who can identify that that was the platform they used where the scam occurred?
Yeah, I think in terms of the way in which scams get perpetrated, obviously they get perpetrated across a range of different platforms. There are instances where people can seek reimbursement where there was a concern around how their ad account or credit card was used when it's connected to our platform, but obviously scammers are frequently taking people off platform and completing scams in other instances. For us, we want to get the signal as early on about any kind of activity on the platform that is inauthentic, and this is also why we've deepened our relationship with the banking industry through the fraud intelligence reciprocal exchange channel to make sure that we're getting high quality signal from them so that we can then use that to identify new methods that may be evading our systems and then fan out and take down larger networks as well, so that, again, we're trying to stop scammers from actually having that first contact well before a scam loss occurs.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But when it does occur, has Meta compensated people for any of the loss that they've experienced?
Well, I think we've responded in our questions on notice that so far we haven't received notifications from people in this regard, but there are instances where we do reimburse people in connection with issues and concerns with their ad account on our services where that's been completed on our services.
So essentially, Meta is happy to register the users who place the scam ads. You approve the scam ads. Meta enables them to use the tools to target particularly vulnerable Australians. Along the way, you're profiting from those scam ads, even when they've been taken down, and essentially taking their money but leaving Meta's users who've lost money and been scammed either then or subsequently. They're basically high and dry. There is your responsibility does not extend to them.
No, I mean I can't emphasise enough how bad scams are for business and how much we invest to try to do everything we can to thwart them and stop them, and to continue to try to stay one step ahead of their tactics.
Thank you. I suspect my time is up, Chair. I've lost track of time and I will hand back to you.
Thank you.
We've all got extra questions.
I know. Thank you, Ms Templeman. And I know we're going to be compressed, but I am going to go back to Ms Daniels next, back to Mr Wallace, and then I will wind proceedings up. So over to you, Ms Daniels.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm now in the car. Hopefully you can hear me. So just getting back to the age assurance gateway piece, I'm curious as to if the responsibility laid with either the phone manufacturer or the app developer, where the liability would sit if young people got onto the platform.
Well, it's a good question, and I think it's one of the things that's come up when app stores other than Quest, the one our own, sort of state objections or concerns around this approach. They don't indicate that they don't have this information, but they are concerned about the liability. When we know of someone being underage on our platform, we have already existing responsibility legally to remove them and understand the need, legislation that creates that responsibility. So we're not trying to shift that over to them. We're just asking for that age awareness. So we're not asking them to assume, sorry to continue, we're not asking them to assume that liability. We are still, that's not part of the legislation.
It's more that because I think where we're moving is to accountability for the platforms. If there was legislation that was developed in which whoever was responsible was going to be fined, for example, for breaches, then the responsibility wouldn't sit with the platform, would it? It would sit with the app developer or the phone manufacturer.
No, I think you can write legislation, and in fact, we can provide you with what we've envisioned that doesn't shift the liability for providing that age information to the App Store. It just requires them to do that. We still, as we already hold in pieces of legislation, certain responsibility and liability in relation to knowing that someone is underage and continuing to provide our service. So we're not trying to shift that. We're just asking for a requirement for them to share that age information with us.
Okay, so my next one goes to the eSafety Commissioner's request around number of children on platforms. I've got a sort of three-part question. I'm going to put it all into one in the interest of time. How easy is it to deliver a number on the number of children on your platforms today or at some historical point in time? Could that be further broken down to times of day? So could you tell us, for example, how many children are on your platform after midnight? And what is your current estimate, or do you have one, of the number of underage users per day on your platforms?
In terms of, let me take underage versus some of the other questions that you asked. In terms of people who are under the age of 13 on the platform, it's very hard for us to assess that because it's sort of like trying to understand a negative. If we know that they're on the platform, we're going to remove them. If we don't know they're on the platform, we don't know they're on the platform. So that's the challenge with that particular number. But we are, we're eager to see the requests for information from the eSafety Commissioner and to try to provide data that will be useful for assessing what's the right way to manage age assurance across apps and the App Store, and are happy to try to provide the kind of data that she's looking for to the extent that we can do that accurately.
Yeah, and I think also... apologies.
Go on, Scarlett.
Apologies. I think we also did share across some data that we have disclosed in a previous Bose notice response on page 36 of our questions on notice that were in response to Ms. Zoe McKenzie's question. So we can resubmit that as a question on notice to you if that's helpful. I'm not sure that it was as granular as you were suggesting in terms of times of the day, etc., but certainly we had made estimates about self-reported age for end users under 18 in Australia in response to questions from the eSafety Commissioner.
So I guess part of the point is if we're looking at age assurance under 16, we would want to know how many children under 16 are on the platform, what times of day they're on the platform, and what your estimates are around the number of users under 18, under 16, under 13 and such. I think that's where I'm going with it.
We can take that on notice, and I think we'll be trying to provide that information in the Bose request as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ms Daniels. Mr Wallace.
Hopefully you'll be able to hear me better now.
Yeah, we can.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I discovered what the problem was.
We don't have a heap of time, so over to you, Mr Wallace.
All right, thank you. There were news reports as recently as yesterday that the PM refused to meet with Mr Clegg regarding the News Media Bargaining Code. Ms Garlick, were you aware that the PM had refused that meeting?
Yes.
Can you advise which Australian government minister or ministers from the government have met with Mr Zuckerberg on the issue of the News Media Bargaining Code?
Under the current government or the former government?
Current. We know it was Josh Frydenberg in the former government. This one?
None.
The current? None.
Yes.
No, none.
Yes. None.
Okay. Chair, I have a whole heap of questions. It's just not worth me going into now, so I will put the rest on notice.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great.
Thank you.
I will loop back to some questions that I didn't get a chance to, and happy to put some of these on notice if we run out of time as well. I appreciate you've had almost 2 hours with us, so thank you. Ms Garlick, I might go to you because at the last hearing you were asked who at Meta approved the decision to deprecate the Facebook News tab in Australia, and you answered that the decisions to deprecate are made by a cross-functional team. I want to drill down on this now because I do want to know precisely when some decisions were made and who ultimately approved them and where those people are located. So the decision to deprecate Facebook News in Australia, who made that decision and when? Was that a decision that your CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, took? Was it a decision approved by the board? Or who was the decision maker?
Sure. I'm happy to try to be helpful and share more information here. So in terms of looking at different products, in terms of products that are existing and prioritisation for the next year, obviously there'll be product teams that look at the performance of that product. And in this instance, I think we've shared with the committee that we saw an 80% drop in usage of that product. And then once that sort of the product, like an analysis of the product market fit and whether that's going to happen is occurring, then a range of different teams will be brought in to assess that situation and look at the broader prioritisation across the company. I think it's on the public record that we've been driving greater efficiencies across our company as well, and so there have been different products that we have discontinued, and so.
But who makes that decision?
A product leadership team, as well as a cross-functional team from different parts of the company, and they'll be
I've got to just stop you there. I mean, This is really where we were last time, and it is, it just sounds like a lot of words to say nothing right now, and it is a simple question, actually, about the decision-making processes in your company. And a decision has been taken to deprecate Facebook News in Australia. Somebody has to take responsibility for that. If it's not your CEO, was it the board? If it's not the board, who is the decision maker?
It's a cross-functional group of people that includes the product leadership team and a range of other leadership people within the... There's no single person. No.
There is... It seems a very unwieldy way to operate a company, but let's go back to some more questions because I think that has left me as unsatisfied as I was last time around. So how about when were you first made aware or informed of the decision that Meta would deprecate Facebook News and stop paying for news in Australia?
I'm not aware of the precise time. I mean, it was a conversation that was happening towards the end of 2023 as the sort of analysis was happening of the performance of the products. I don't recall specifically.
You didn't receive an email about it?
No, I mean, I appreciate that the concern that this all sounds like a very complex way to engage, but usually there are cross-functional teams that are working across different issues like news products, and obviously the policy team is part of those conversations, and so there's a lot of people involved in that, and so I don't have a recollection about a specific email or individual.
It's a pretty big decision, and it's one that has profound implications here in Australia. And so I remain stunned, and it is, you know, almost beyond belief that there isn't an answer to these questions. I'm going to go to my next question then, because I'm going to not give up on this. The decision to stop paying for news in Australia, who made that decision and when?
Well, obviously the commercial deals that were done were connected in with the Facebook News product, because those deals were about seeking sort of greater and different access to news to surface it in the Facebook News product. So as the decision is made to, when the decision was made to deprecate the Facebook News product, then the sort of flow-on decision from that is that there was not going to be deals renewed, but obviously we paid out those deals even though the product announcement to deprecate it happened in February.
So would it be someone like, you know, your President of Global Affairs making these decisions?
Well, it's the product leadership team in partnership with the broader leadership team.
So who sits on the product leadership team?
A range of different people.
I might get you to put that on
but obviously,
notice.
I mean, the policy...
decision to withdraw the news in Australia back in 2021, you know, was that... Who made that decision and where?
Again, that was made by a range of different people working on that issue.
Is it all this same mysterious cross-functional team that is making all of these decisions?
Yes.
So you're going to say the same thing for me when I ask who decided to remove news in Canada?
Yes.
So your CEO doesn't make any of these decisions. Your board not aware of any of these decisions being made?
I mean, I think generally, yes, they're
Do they
obviously
take
aware.
part in the decision-making process?
I mean, I think we've had to answer some questions from the ACCC in relation to this, and I think there's obviously general awareness of things that are happening in the company. That is their responsibility. But in terms of the, you know, process and practical procedure to sign off on those will happen, you know, through teams that are working and looking at this from a range of different perspectives, because obviously, you know, a decision to deprecate a product is, and we've deprecated many products that have not been successful, is, you know, one that requires a significant implementation in terms of managing that through.
Okay, I'm going to have another try. The decision to provide tools to users on Instagram and to filter out political content, for example. Who made that decision?
I think that
when?
I can't remember when we made that announcement. I think that's been some time during the course of 2023. But obviously that is another decision that gets made where you know, we're looking at feedback from users and then we're assessing if and how to implement that, and then checking in with a range of different teams. But I do also want to sort of emphasise that, you know, a lot of these products are not just in Australia, they're global products, or they're available in a range of different countries. And so I think that might be why I'm sensing some frustration at my inability to provide specifics, because there do need to be a large number of teams given.
Your board and your CEO are well used to operating and heading up a global entity, and it is astonishing to me. I'm really, really struggling, as I think a lot of Australian people will be right now, the difference between, you know, the decisions. You know, what goes to a board CEO? How does Meta define itself as, you know, are you just making decisions based on commercial decisions, or do you regard your social responsibility to be a good global citizen as part of that decision-making process? Because at the moment, if you've removed the board, you've removed the CEO, well, who knows who's involved in this team, but it's very difficult to see how you are factoring in your responsibilities or obligations to be a good global citizen if none of those players potentially are even involved.
Well, I think you've been asking about the specifics of the team involved in making the decision.
Several attempts to do that.
Yes,
indeed.
and
yes.
but I think, I mean, obviously we're investing and trying to provide services that people find useful and that people engage with on our services. So that's certainly, looking at how people are engaging on our services is a very important factor in terms of how we're trying to make those decisions. I think there was a lot in your question, so I'm trying to respond to all of it. But I also think that, when we're talking about the sustainability of the news ecosystem, I don't think we should be talking about sort of social obligations or things like that. I think, there've been a lot of parliamentary inquiries looking into the future of sustainable journalism, and I think that it's a bigger question than any one company.
Sure. Do you see you have a role?
Chair, can I just... I do want to be fair to both the witness and the government. I do want to clarify a question that I just asked, and I'm conscious that you think that I am done, and it's now 4:58.
You want to clarify something for the record?
I do.
Okay,
yes.
Go.
Ms. Garlick, I asked you a question earlier about whether a government minister had met with Mr. Zuckerberg, and I just want to be clear. I should clarify that. Has a government minister met with any senior executive from Meta about the news bargaining code? Because I did specifically say Mr. Zuckerberg. And your answer to that was no. And I'm just going back. I'm trying to do the right thing by you. I'm trying to do the right thing, in fact, by the government, and making sure that we get total clarity on this. Has a government minister spoken with a senior official within Meta, a senior executive within Meta, about the news bargaining code, the current government?
Yes.
Right. And who was that?
So our Vice President of APAC Policy, Simon Milner, visited Australia in February to meet with Stephen Jones.
Right. And is Stephen Jones the only government minister that has met with a senior executive?
Yes.
He is the minister responsible. Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
Thanks, Chair.
You've straightened up your record now?
Well,
you're welcome to put more on notice, which I will be as well. So, we're running out of time.
To be fair, Chair, you had 30 minutes in your first session.
No, I did not. I've actually got a calculation exactly of how we've done it. So I did give you another...
Let's
not waste time arguing.
Government and non-government time. The government's come out well ahead, Chair.
I can't help the lack of appearance from opposition members at this committee hearing. Let's not be childish here. I gave you the call back, and if there are more questions, please put them on notice, as I will too, because we've now hit 5 o'clock, which is when we said we would wrap. So trust me, I didn't get all my questions up either. So I will put those on notice. But it is 5 o'clock, so we are concluding today's hearing. Thank you to both of you for appearing today, Ms. Garlick and Ms. Davis. And thanks, as always, to Hansard and the broadcasting team for your assistance, for the Secretariat for all of your hard work. Thank you to the committee members that were able to join today as well. And the committee has agreed that any questions that we've asked you to put on notice, that those responses should be back to the Secretariat by Wednesday, the 18th of September 2024. And on that note, the committee now stands adjourned.